Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, host of the Football History Dude podcast, right here on the Sports History Network. Now, before we jump into another sports history adventure, let me tell you about this episode's sponsor. We partnered with Rochester Sports Autographs, the largest JSA authenticated autograph distributor in the United States, where you can get deals on over 30,000 autographed sports collectibles. They even have film, music, and other entertainment autographs on the site, so there's something for everyone. Perhaps you're looking for a gift for Mother's Day, or maybe Father's Day. Heck, who needs a holiday as an excuse to give a piece of sports history to your loved ones? Or how about yourself? Today seems like a great day to add to your sports cave, right? But how is RSA able to offer such great deals on JSA authentication, you ask? Well, they do this by making deals directly with athletes, so there are no extra markups, and they choose to pass these savings on to the customer. All orders from Rochester Sports Autographs are top quality and shipped to your door with top authentication and money-back guarantee. And to make sure RSA knows that the Sports History Network sent you, we created a special link for you. All you have to do is head to shoprsa.com/SHN. Again, that's shoprsa.com/SHN. Head over there to get your piece of sports history today.
In our current era of post-Deflategate football, it's hard to imagine a football that could come onto the game that's not approved and not legal. Well, back in the day, there was plenty of them that came in and they were not identified, but Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com joins us to tell us about the bootleg footballs of yesteryear, coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskinddispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskinddispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And welcome to the portal that we're going to go back in time and look at some great football archaeology, some great old stuff that our friend Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com is going to share with us from one of his recent tidbits. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Darren, thank you. Looking forward to chatting about bootleg footballs. It's kind of an interesting idea or issue. Everybody knows about bootlegs, but this is a different deal. These are bootleg footballs.
Yeah, when I first saw that, I was picturing a football full of illegal bathtub gin back in the Prohibition days. But after I read it, I was straightened out right away. Sorry, the way my mind works. But why don't you explain to us the story of bootleg footballs?
Yeah, well, so just, following up on your comment, so the bootleg initially, the first bootleg was Pop Warner at Stanford. He had a fake off. So he basically ran a fake Statue of Liberty, and the fullback, because he was running a double wing at the time with a fullback deep getting direct snap. He faked the Statue of Liberty to the wing coming around from right to left, and then the fullback ran to the right, and everybody went with the chase the right wing who was running to the left, and the fullback ran into the end zone. So that's where the original bootleg came from, and it had the name came from bootleg gin, bootleg rum, so it's Prohibition time, and so that's where the name originates. So it's the idea of fake and illegal and inappropriate. And so during the same era, one of the things that was happening is teams were, some teams were choosing to pass more often than others. And so some of the, back then there were lots of different companies manufacturing footballs. And so some of those manufacturers began making balls that were, the ball had changed. I think it was 1912. Maybe I'm off on that, but somewhere in that area. The ball had been slimmed down from the big fat rugby ball. So it had been slimmed down, but it was still bigger than what we're used to today. So it's remained difficult to throw. Typically, only guys with big hands could really throw it effectively. And so some of the manufacturers started producing slimmer footballs that didn't really meet the game's specifications, because the game, by then they had specified it's got to be, there was tolerance, but it had to be this much around, this length, da 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 da. And so they started producing these balls, and obviously, if you were a running team, you looked at the slim ball and said, "What is this doing here on the field? Because I don't need it. My team's going to run the ball. We're not going to go crazy and pass it 12 times a game like some of these passing teams." So, they, it became a controversy. And so, kind of went back and forth for a while. And then eventually the things, they changed the rules basically in 1934 to change the regulations on the ball, the specifications. So the ball would be about an inch thinner around the girth. But, so one of the things that, sometimes it doesn't seem to make as big a difference, but, you have to realize that the ball before the mid 1920s was not only a bigger, fatter ball, but it's kind of a different ball too. And by that, I mean that until the mid 20s, when someone invented the internal valve, if the ball deflated, and they did so regularly because they just didn't have the quality control on these rubber bladders that were inside the ball, when the ball deflated, you had to unlace the ball, pull the bladder out, inflate it much like you would a balloon. I mean, there was like a nipple kind of thing sticking off from the bladder, and you inflated that, and then you tied it off to keep the air inside the bladder. And then you stuffed it back inside the ball, and then you took this leather lacing that was comparable to the lacing, any baseball glove today, it's that flexible lacing, and you weave it in and out of the different fingers, and so that's basically what the lacing was on a football back then. Now it's this really hard, it's polyvinyl chloride, this hard plastic, it's stuff we make plumbing pipes out of. It's stiff material. And so, but back then it was the same laces that were on a foot, in a baseball glove, right? And so it was fairly flexible, and it could only be as tight. The lacing on a football was only as tight as the guy who tied it together when they reinflated it. So, quality control and standardization just weren't part of that picture, at the time. So, so it's just one of those things where, it's easy to lose sight of the difference at the time. But so, the ability for a quarterback to throw that, to throw a spiral and flick their wrist, and, flick it over to get a nice tight spiral, it was just much harder to do because these laces barely stuck up over the leather on the surface of the ball, right? And so once they had the internal valve, and that became, the second half of the 20s was kind of a transition period where some balls had it and some didn't. But when they, if you think about a football now and the lacing, there's the laces that go, I'll call them, perpendicular to the length of the ball, right? But then there's two laces that are underneath those perpendicular laces that kind of go back and forth, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can picture that, but so putting the lacing underneath the perpendicular laces raised the profile of the laces above the surface of the ball. And because they no longer had to relace the ball, they could make that lacing stiffer, even before they used plastics. They could make the lacing stiffer, and therefore it was easier for the quarterback to grip the ball, to throw a spiral, blah, 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 blah. So anyways, I mean, it's one of these things where there's a lot of parts of football, blocking, what we call blocking now was interference originally. That was illegal, and then guys started doing it, and they didn't call it. So then it became part of the game. The bootleg footballs, people started using them. They were illegal, but they kind of let it go, and then eventually they changed the rules to reflect that, right? So there's a lot of parts of football where people did stuff that was against the rules or against the sportsmanship standards of the time, and eventually people kind of said, oh, yeah, let's just let that go, and it became part of the rules. So bootleg footballs are the reason people throw long, tight spirals 60, 70 yards downfield nowadays.
Hey, that fascinating stuff. Now, your story of you telling us, with the vulcanized rubber bladders, pulling those out and blowing them up. It took me back to some things I read, I believe, from the rugby days where they still used an actual pig's bladder, and the poor soul that had to unlace it and blow up that rotting pig's bladder, put their lips on that and blow up the ball. That poor sucker had to be the worst job you could have, I think, on the football field.
Well, and I mean, talking about the pig's bladder, but a lot of people think that the reason football is played in the fall is because people had piglets that they raised all summer, spring and all summer long, and then they slaughtered them in the fall. And what comes along with slaughtering a pig? Well, you have pig's bladders available all of a sudden. So a post-harvest, one of the post-harvest ceremonies, celebrations, they have this kicking game where you try to kick this pig's bladder from your town into the next, or your village into the next. And that's where this football kicking game originated. And eventually people started covering that pig's bladder with a leather cover to make it, more sustainable, or, just to last longer. But, that's the origins of the game, right? So it's just like, it's kind of crazy, kind of how it's all evolved. It's like every other technology, things become more uniform and consistent. But that's where the kind of the game starts.
A lesson within the lesson. That's good stuff. And I'm sealing up my envelope right now from these advertisements for Goldsmith that you have on your website on this post to get my $10 footballs, the F5 and the X5. So I'm gonna get one of each for $10.
Well, hey, one of the images. So I mean, for those who are just listening and haven't seen the post, this would be a fun one to go look at, just because there's a number of images from period catalogs that show footballs, and there's one from D&M, which was a big manufacturer supplier at the time. They had a football they called the Slim Jim, and it was slimmer than the standard ball. And they're advertising, it's right there in their catalog. There's no secret about it, but it was slimmer than the specifications required it to be. So, well,
now you're making me hungry for a meat product that comes in plastic now. So talking about Slim Jims,
yeah.
But
well, check in with Nancy Pelosi. I think she's got some. she was eating some. Well, long story.
Hey, well, Tim, this has been another great lesson in helping us to understand the game of football and where it's came from, and some of the intricacies and equipment, and just the history of the game, and how the folks before us had to play with less than what we see today on TV, and what the players play on a high school level even. And we really appreciate you doing the digging up on this research and sharing it with us each week, and sharing it with us each evening. You can read it on your phone or computer. Tim has a great way of delivering that message. And Tim, why don't you share the information with us right now?
Sure. So footballarchaeology.com, you can just go out there, click on any any link, and all of them are going to provide an opportunity to subscribe. So if you want to subscribe, just guarantees that you get it every day. You don't have to read it every day. You can save them up and read them on the weekend, whatever. But it'll be delivered into your inbox at 7:00 Eastern every night. And then alternatively, you can follow me on Twitter at Football Archaeology. And if you don't like either of those options, just go out and check out Football Archaeology anytime you want, and you can set the most recent article. They're just listed out there in order of their being posted.
All right, Tim Brown, footballarchaeology.com. Thank you once again for sharing these stories and this information, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Very good. Look forward to it, Darren. Thank you.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskinddispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskinddispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude. And I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website, seriously, all you got to do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.